Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the iPhone 14 and compare it against the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE and see which specific one is the better one for you. And honestly, if you should end up saving a ton of money going for the S20 FE that's still very popular, I think, or going for the iPhone 14 that just came out. So if you want to pick up either one of these, the links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside and the price tags, the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE came out back in 2020, a little bit later part of 2020. It's about 2 years old as of this point, and it was supposed to be like a budget tier phone, and since then it's gone down in price quite a bit. I think on Amazon you can probably find them for less than $400. On the iPhone 14, this phone just came out, so it is a $799 phone, and it's not, the most expensive phone right now, but it's also not a super cheap device, and the S20 FE is definitely, you can buy it for like less than half the cost, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Now on the front, the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE has a 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display. It's a 120Hz panel, 1080p, and it's an overall really good display. I think this phone holds up very, very well. I don't think it's like the best panel as of right now, but it's a hole punch display, and I still think it holds up fairly well for this day and age. On the iPhone 14, we have a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages between both, but you are getting a 60Hz panel on the iPhone 14, but it's a higher resolution display than the S20 FE. So there's a lot of overlap, a lot of things that kind of go in one another, but you're lacking a hole punch, you're getting a notch on the iPhone 14, but it's still a pretty good display, and I really don't hate it. Now, I do think the S20 FE's panel is still good, and it might be better in some ways. The iPhone 14 panel looks a little bit better in some ways, and it's also a higher, resolution, and it does get a higher brightness as well. So those are some things to keep in mind. On the bottom, you're getting a lightning port on the iPhone 14, where on the S20 FE, you are getting a USB Type-C port, which I prefer. I love USB-C ports, and you are getting that type of capability on the S20 FE, where you're not getting that on the iPhone 14. Maybe the next iPhone will have it, but in this case, not so much. You're also getting on the back a very interesting setup. So with the iPhone 14, we have that standard glass back, which looks very good. I love this glass back between them. The iPhone 14 also has a dual camera setup, where the S20 FE has a plastic back. So that is a very interesting thing, that a phone like that has a plastic back. Samsung called it Glastic, which was very corny, and I just kind of had to throw it in here. But you're also getting a triple camera setup on the S20 FE, which I think is pretty good. Having a triple camera setup on that phone isn't bad, and I do think it kind of holds up in this day and age. Now on top of that, with some other things, you're getting, the lack of a SIM card tray on the iPhone 14, which is kind of sad, but you are getting that on the S20 FE, which I actually do like a lot. You're also getting IP certification between both, which is really cool, and you're also getting, wireless charging, but the S20 FE does have reverse wireless charging, which is a really nice touch. We do not have that type of capability on the iPhone 14, although I wish we did. The S20 FE has that type of capability, which is great. The iPhone 14 has MagSafe charging, which is cool. It also has crash detection, emergency SOS satellite mode. So those are some other really cool things that we have on that phone over the S20 FE. But I truly do believe there are a bunch of features on both these phones, and I do think when it comes down to the outside, there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of differences. And I think the S20 FE does have a few more features than the iPhone 14, but there's also some features the 14 has that the 2-year-old S20 FE doesn't have. So that kind of makes a little bit of sense to me. Now in the camera department, like I mentioned, you're getting a 12 megapixel wide angle lens and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera on the back of the iPhone 14, and on the front, you're getting a 12 megapixel wide angle lens. On the S20 FE, we're getting a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 8 megapixel telephoto lens, 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and on the front, you're getting a 32 megapixel wide angle lens. Now both of these support 4K at 60 on the front and the back, which is really nice. So having that type of capability right there is a really cool feature. Now on the S20 FE, even though this phone is 2 years old, it still has gotten software updates and it's still going to be here for quite a bit of time. But in my experience, having a phone like the Galaxy S20 FE, it has been a pretty decent camera experience. I mean, that phone can practically do it all. It has tons of features built in, but I will say the S20 at that time had a better camera for sure, but this thing is still a pretty good camera. This thing has a tons of capability. You have still a lot of modes that the iPhone 14 kind of are, still coming out with now that the S20 FE still has, which is really cool. Now on the iPhone 14 side, I will say this type of phone I think gets the job done for sure. It's not a bad phone by any means. With a phone like the iPhone 14, it is one of the best cameras you can probably buy for this type of price tag, at least in the brand new market. But that doesn't mean, the iPhone 13 is like way worse than this thing. That is not the case. This is still a very, capable phone, but I would say the last few generations, at least with the iPhone 13, it shares a lot of similarity. So there wasn't really that big of a jump. And I will say the S20 FE still has a probably more amount of features than the iPhone 14, but the iPhone 14 camera is still very good. And I might say the quality is better overall in the 14. And I will say another advantage is the social media applications. If you're using Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, you're going to be getting a better quality lens on the iPhone 14 than on the S20 FE. But I still think the FE is a very good camera and you're getting tons and tons of features on that specific phone for sure. So in terms of that kind of covers up this specific camera comparison. Now in the software department, there's really no competition. The iPhone 14 is definitely going to be outlasting the Galaxy S20 FE for sure. That phone, the S20 FE, is still going to be supported, I think, for another year if I'm not mistaken. But I will say the iPhone 14 is going to be outlasting so many phones that are coming out this specific year. So I think when it comes down to it, by a long shot, the iPhone 14 is definitely going to be the one you're probably going to want to pick up if you want the longer lasting phone. But the S20 FE is still here. It's still going to be getting security updates even after that. So I don't really think it's going to be a crazy big deal, but that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. Now in the performance segment, on the iPhone 14, you're going to be getting that Apple A15 Bionic chip inside of it with 6GB of RAM, where the S20 FE had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside of it with 6GB of RAM on the base model, and it did go up to 8GB of RAM. Now in my opinion, from my performance segment of using that phone, I had a great time with the S20 FE. And I think with all the software updates and everything like that, it's been a very decent time. And when I was using my S20 FE, I think that phone did a great job. Now, it's not perfect. It's not like the best performing phone of all time right now, especially now that we have like the Snapdragon 8 generation processors that, are going on now. But I still think a phone like the Galaxy S20 FE is still relevant. And I've seen tons of people play all sorts of games and all sorts of emulated games on that phone. And they've been having great performance on that device. Now, with something more so like on the iPhone 14, this is probably going to be the phone that a majority of people are probably going to end up picking up. And I will say this performance is very, very good as well. I will say maybe it's not like the best performing phone of all time right now because the 14 Pro is having a better chipset and that this thing shares the same chipset as like the iPhone 13 pretty much. So the iPhone 14 isn't like a world's better amount of performance than the iPhone 13 we already had, but I will say it's still a very good performing phone, and in some ways it might be a better performing phone and a more optimized chipset than what the S20 FE has. But I will say even the 865 chipset is still a very relevant chipset, and I think that phone still is extremely relevant as well. So when it comes down to it, and that phone is doing great, and honestly I will say in the performance segment the iPhone 14 is probably the better one for sure. And the battery department though, very interesting setup. So with the S20 FE, you're getting a 4500 mAh battery. That phone supports reverse wireless charging and all sorts of other features as well. On the iPhone 14, a 3279 mAh battery. But from what I've tested, my iPhone 14 has been giving me amazing battery life. I've been getting tremendous battery life from that phone. With the S20 FE, I also had great battery life. But I think now in this day and age, the iPhone 14 might be more optimized in the battery life department than even what the S20 FE was when it first came out, and even now after degradation and software updates that aren't really tailored to this phone specifically. So to kind of sum up this whole entire comparison, what I'll tell you is I think the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE is a great phone. I think the S20 FE still holds up very well, and I think it's still super relevant. But I think the iPhone 14 clearly is, I think, a better phone in some areas and probably most areas that I personally agree with. And those are some of the things to probably keep in mind. But I think with the S20 FE, for having a hole punch display, for looking the way it does, for having reverse wireless charging and all of those types of features, you're getting a solid phone in that direction. But with the iPhone 14, it's kind of available, and it's probably going to be more available than the S20 FE in more stores because it's still, just a new iPhone. So that's probably something to keep in mind, but that's kind of how both these phones kind of compare as of right now. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.